So our next speaker this morning will be Daniel Huson, and he's going to tell us about Dendroscope.
Yeah, thank you, V. When I was looking at the program and seeing all the interesting talks that are coming up, I thought this might be a bit boring, just a talk about a tree viewer. So I added and networks. So this is about a viewer that views both trees and networks, and that might make it slightly more interesting. So the talk has 3 parts, and first of all, I am going to give a little overview of what Dendroscope is in terms of a tree viewer, and then we'll move on to more recent stuff. So you might be asking yourself, do we really need another tree viewer? If you go to Felsenstein's website, there's all these different tree viewers that you can download and use, but none of the existing programs do it all. I'm not saying that Dendroscope does it all, but I think it does a lot more than any individual program. So what we did is we looked at all the different programs that exist, thought what are the nice parts of these programs, and we tried to put them all into one program. And so here's a couple of requirements that a tree viewer should have. Obviously, you want to have all the different visualizations that people like to use implemented. You want to be able to change the line widths, the colors, the fonts, and whatever. You want to write labels on your tree. You want to be able to edit your tree, reroute it, reorder the subtrees, hide parts of the tree, delete parts of the tree, extract subtrees and make new trees out of those. You want to be able to save and open and in different formats and different graphics formats, export it to SVG and then put it into Illustrator or something. And you want it to run on very large files. So you want to be able to load 20,000 trees, or you want to load a tree with 1 million nodes. And obviously, this all has to run on all the different operating systems that exist. Okay, and so we've written such a program. It started off as a project. We wanted to write a paper in 1 day. So it was a very long day, and obviously we weren't finished at the end of the day. It took like months and months, but we finally got this viewer here, and so there's 8 different views that you can, all the ones that we could find. So these are standard ones. This one's an interesting one. People like to have the edges going inwards sometimes. And then there's this, and then there's this one. This one here is also kind of a weird one. And this is a more familiar view. And then you can load a bunch of trees here. I loaded 16,000 trees, and you can click through those trees and look at all 16,000 if you want. And here I've loaded the NCBI taxonomy, 325,000 nodes, and you can easily just zoom in, scroll, and click on things, search for things, hide subtrees. And so it took quite a lot of software engineering to get it to run nice and responsively, but it does. You can really work with this tree. It doesn't become sluggish and difficult to work with. So you can zoom in. We've got different kinds of ways of highlighting parts of the tree. Then you can do searches. Then you can select things, and then you can extract subtrees. So we're trying to make a tool that makes it easy to work with trees. Okay, so that was what I was originally going to talk about. Now this is supposed to make it more interesting. Phylogenetic networks, and in particular, I want to define a new type of phylogenetic network because we don't seem to have enough different definitions. So it all starts with the concept of a split, which many of you will be very familiar with. When you have a phylogenetic tree, you take any edge in that tree, and then that tree defines a bipartitioning of your taxon set into the 2 sets, one that in the one subtree defined by that edge, and the taxon in the other subtree. So that's a split, and you get the split encoding of a tree by doing that for all the edges in the tree, and let's call that sigma of t. And then people like to consider the split encoding because of this theorem, or you like to consider the split encoding of a phylogenetic tree because you can reconstruct the tree from the encoding, and if you have an arbitrary set of splits, then many of us are familiar with this theorem that says that there exists in a unique tree that gives rise to those splits if and only if the splits are all pairwise compatible. And so someone gives you a bunch of splits, you check whether it's compatible. If it is, you can draw a tree. And there's been a lot of work done on how to represent incompatible splits. So you give them a set of splits that don't have this pairwise compatibility property, and a lot of stuff goes back to Hans-Jürgen Bandel and Andreas Dress in the early 90s, when they came up with the idea of split decomposition and split networks and stuff like that. And probably people before that have been looking at similar stuff also. And here, the solution is, if I give a set of incompatible splits, then rather than using one single edge like in a tree to represent that split, what I do is I use a band of parallel edges. And to find out what's the split corresponding to that, I cut the graph along that band of parallel edges, and I get the two subsets in that way. And if I have two different splits that are incompatible with each other, then they're going to form a little box in the network somewhere. So whenever you have incompatibilities, that gives rise to these little boxes. And now there's a number of issues with split networks. One is that these boxes seem to be non-intuitive for biologists, at least. Well, this is quite a simple situation, but when you've got lots of boxes and higher dimensional boxes, then it becomes hard to believe that this has really got something to do with biology. And then another thing that computer scientists don't like is that the number of edges and nodes in the network can be exponential in the number of splits, which is obviously not good. And we usually only see it in this layout. We don't see it in other drawings that look more like trees, more like what biologists are used to. And these networks are very different from another type of phylogenetic networks that people are studying called reticulate networks. So for a long time, we've been hoping to find a new way to represent incompatible splits. And then recently, I was visiting the Max Planck Institute in Shanghai, and I was talking to Stefan Grunewald, and he said to me, he doesn't see why people don't just use Hasse diagrams to represent incompatible splits. So here, you take your splits, and then you root the splits. So you choose an outgroup, and then all the split parts that don't contain the outgroup are your clusters. And in a Hasse diagram, it looks like this. You have the largest, the full taxon set up here, and then you have these subset relationships drawn in this way. But the reason why people don't use that to represent incompatible cluster sets of split networks is because in this kind of network, the clusters are represented by nodes and not by edges. And we like to have the edges representing the ways that things get split because we want to give them different edge lengths and so on. And that's not possible. You can't. I mean, this would be quite unintuitive to biologists also. So in any case, even though I was quite inspired by talking to Stefan, so I went back home and tried to implement something. Obviously, it's quite straightforward to implement this. And I thought, OK, many of the splits can actually be represented by an edge. Everyone has got one incoming edge. Let's use that edge to represent that split or that cluster. And now here we have two problem children, because they've got more than one incoming edge. And here the simple idea is simply, well, just put an edge in there. And then now we have a situation where each of the splits or the clusters are represented by one of these black edges. And these other edges, we'll just call them blue edges. And they're just there to make sure that everybody has the right set of leaves below it, but they don't represent any of the splits. So I'm not sure. It would be nice to know whether people have been looking at this type of network or not, this modification. Well, until I know whether it already has a name, I'll propose to call it a cluster network, because it's a way to represent a set of clusters, just like a split network is a way to represent a set of splits. And so let's compare split networks to cluster networks. So here's the split networks, and let's look at this split here. So this is a split that's incompatible to three other splits in the split set. And so you can see one side of the split highlighted here. Now let's look at the corresponding cluster network. And so here we use 4 edges to represent one split. That's a cut set of the graph that represents a split. Here we only need to use one edge. And the way that we find out what is a split that's represented by this edge is that we just follow the target node of the edge down to all the children. And everybody who I can reach from here is in the cluster. Okay, and so in this kind of network, it's different than from a reticulate network. We'll look at that in a moment. Each black edge represents exactly one split. And if you think about it, all the black edges can always be drawn as a bunch of small trees that where the lines don't intersect. So you can always embed the black part of the of this network into the plane, and then you might have to have some blue edges crossing. But it's a nice way to go it's an alternative way to represent non-compatible splits. Now let's compare this to reticulate networks, something that's the topic of this conference here. So here again is that cluster network. It's a nice network. It's easy to compute. It has quadratic number of edges in the number of splits, and it's fast to compute. And it's uniquely defined, so there's no optimization or choices to make. You just go ahead and draw the thing. So it's a direct representation of the data set. And now here's a reticulate network. So here, if I look at an edge here, to find out which split it represents, I also go to the right. But in a reticulate network, which is supposed to be modeling something like hybridization or recombination, any of these nodes that has more than one incoming edge, that's a reticulation node, where any given time, only one of the two incoming edges is turned on. So think of, for example, taking two different gene trees and superimposing them, and then depending on which tree you're in the superimposed graph, one edge is going to be on or the other one's going to be on. Or think of this, this is given rise to by hybridization or recombination. Some of the genetic material comes this way and some comes that way. In any case, one of these edges, so here you can see to represent exactly the same split, I've chosen this edge, and this blue edge is turned on, so I get these two taxa, but these two are turned off, so these are not involved. And similarly up here, this one's turned off. So this is like a soft-wired network, if you like. For any given reticulation node, you can always make a choice which of the edges is on and which is off. And now, because you have that possibility, here you can start trying to optimize the network, try and find a network that uses the minimum number of these reticulation nodes and a minimum number of black edges. Here, each split corresponds to exactly one black edge. Here, one black edge might have more than one split associated with it because you can you represent different splits by turning different edges on and off. And so here, to find such a representation that uses a minimum number of reticulate networks has been shown to be a hard problem. So here we have something that's nice and fast to compute, and here we have something that's not so easy to compute, but then this has other advantages than that. For example, here we have an edge where there's a node where there's three incoming edges, so you can't interpret such nodes directly as a reticulation node where there's been hybridization or something. Okay, so Dendroscope 2. So I'm working on Dendroscope 2. Dendroscope 1 hasn't been published yet, but I hope it will be published before this new version comes out. So the idea here is to have to modify the program so it can do, first of all, different consensus trees and super trees. So if you load in 16,000 trees, you don't really want to look at each one individually. You want to form some kind of consensus. And then also compute consensus networks and super networks. So it's an idea. The consensus networks are something due to Vince Moulton and Barbara Holland. And then, so this program now uses an extended Newick format, which was Bernard Moret and others published 1 or 2 years ago in bioinformatics. So you can represent one of these networks simply in a Newick bracket string. So that's implemented in Dendroscope 2. And the goal is, so anything that you can do with Dendroscope 1 with a tree, you can also do it with a network. So here's an example. Here I've loaded up 5 fungal trees. These are trees on slightly different numbers of taxa. There's 63 taxa in total here, but one tree only has 29, and the biggest tree has 46. So these are overlapping taxa set, but not an identical ones. And so in Dendroscope, you can scroll through those, look at the different trees. And so in Dendroscope 2, then you can go down to this little secret menu down here, and then you can say, for example, give me the strict consensus tree. So this is strict consensus tree on a set of partial trees. So what was really happening here, we used the Z-closure method that published a couple of years ago to produce a set of full trees, and then full splits, and each split is then compared with the splits of the partial trees. And whenever a split is possible in a tree, then we make sure there actually is in that tree. So if a split misses a whole tree, then we don't look at that. And then you get a strict consensus tree. I'm not sure whether it's always going to be a tree, because I know for sure that if you do the majority consensus tree, defined in a similar way, actually turns out to be not so much of a tree. So here what I'm doing is producing the Z closure of all the splits here. So I get a set of full splits, and then each split, to get into this network, you have to be in more than 50% of the trees that you can actually be in. And so here the pigeonhole principle doesn't apply, so splits can collide, because if a split's only in these 3 trees, only possible in these 3 trees, and it happens to be in these 2, it gets in, and maybe somebody's in the other 3, in the top 3. And so it's a consensus tree. That's why I put the 66 and 699 around it because in the quotes, because it's not really a tree. And then there's different ways to look at that in Dendroscope. And then you can do, say, give me only those that have more than 20% support, then it gets slightly more complicated. Or you can say, just give me all the splits in the whole split set. And this is a way to also compare trees. If you just want to compare the trees, how similar are they? Just do this. Okay, summary. Dendroscope 1 is a new interactive tool for phylogenetic trees. Cluster networks are a new type of phylogenetic network that are easy to compute and look more like trees than split networks do. Dendroscope 2 will contain these consensus methods. It will read, write, and draw cluster and reticulate networks. And the first version is already available. The second one will be available when it's done. And here are some credits. Thank you.
I have a couple of requests for Dendroscope 3.
Okay.
So, one would be for visualizing large phylogenetic trees to have some hyperbolic.
Yeah, that's already in Dendroscope 1.
Okay, that's already there.
Yep.
And the second one is support for visualizing pair of trees.
Facing
like
each other.
time
Yeah.
trees.
Okay, that will be Dendroscope 3.
Yeah, I sort of have a request for Dendroscope 3 as well, which is
Four.
4. Yeah.
4, okay, this is going to be 4.
Which I don't know if this is sort of within the scope or not, but taking some kind of image file and producing the tree from it. So often you get a nice picture of a tree, but you don't want to type it in by hand. So.
Okay, that's probably 5 or 6. So what I didn't show you, talking about images, what I do have in Dendroscope 1.5 is that you can load up images, so you can have a directory of images, and then it will match the taxon names with the file names in that directory, and it will put the images, lay the images out on the picture, on the tree for you. So we actually need that because we're studying the phylogeny of Chinese characters at the moment with somebody in Shanghai, and we couldn't figure out how to get Java to write Chinese characters, so we made little images of all the Chinese characters, and they all appear.
You said that's freely available.
Yep.
But can we modify, add some of?
No.
No?